What are some of the most common financial mistakes that new widows make, and how can they avoid them?
Well, there's several, but as I said, making irrevocable decisions. I think that the problem again is psychological effect of your financial. Your husband died, and couldn't control that, so you want to prove that you're in control. So you prove it by, oh, I'm going to go take a trip, or I'm going to spend a lot of money. I wanted a new car.
Welcome to Money Matters, the podcast that guides you through the complexities of financial management. I'm your host, Chris Hensley, and today we have a very special episode featuring the renowned authors Alexandra Armstrong and Mary Donahue. They're here to discuss their groundbreaking book, On Your Own, A Widow's Guide to Emotional and Financial Well-Being. Have you ever wondered how to rebuild your life after a significant loss, both emotionally and financially? Our guests today have dedicated their careers to answering this very question. Alexandra and Mary bring not only their professional expertise, but also their personal experiences that resonate deeply with many. They'll be sharing the latest insights from their sixth edition, including new financial planning technologies and heartfelt stories that you won't want to miss. Stay with us to the very end as Alexandra and Mary reveal critical advice for widows, from avoiding the common financial pitfalls to leveraging support networks effectively. This episode is packed with valuable information that could change your financial future. So let's dive right in. Alexandra and Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank
We're
you.
here.
I'm super excited to have you here. I'm going to hold up, where's my copy of it? The copy of your book, On Your Own. This is the Widow's Guide to Emotional and Financial Well-Being. I didn't mean to do this, but here we are at the end of May. And I've done about 3 or 4 episodes on estate planning, somehow related to deaths. that wasn't on purpose, but here we are. And so this is a nice compliment to some of the recent shows that I've had on estate planning there. So I want to just get right into it and ask you, what motivated you to write the first edition of On Your Own, A Widow's Guide to Emotional and Financial Well-Being back in 1993?
Well, I started it. I'm a financial planner, and had clients who were, and I'm sure you do too, had clients came in and they were recently widowed, and the information went in one ear and went out the other. And I thought if I could write something that they could read chapter by chapter at their own pace, that would be a help. And then I thought, now wait, we just have plenty of books on just financial, and that's really important. But financial and psychological impact of widowhood, there really wasn't a book that combined the two. So I asked my client, friend, and widow, who was a psychologist, Mary Donahue, if she could help me out. So Mary?
Okay, I'll take it from there. Well, my part in this is that I was suddenly widowed with no warning. And my husband and I had selected Alex as a financial planner, but he did the bulk of the work and worked to get me involved. And I always said, oh, another day, honey, we really need to do this. And then he suddenly died. And I was left not knowing very much at all about my financial situation. And so Alex knew a great deal more. And so I turned to Alex to get more information. But I really gave her a hard time in the beginning because I was very tentative. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Did my father think this? Did my husband think that? So she gave me a very schoolmarm lecture one day and told me to shape up. And so I attempted to do just that, which led to my wanting to share my story with other widows. So hopefully they will not be in the same situation that I was in.
I love it. I love it. I mean, what a great, I would say, marriage of two different, you having experienced that real life, real time, and then Alex having had the experience of dealing with widows before from the financial perspective side of it. And Alex, you shared with us the idea that there really wasn't something like this out there yet. When you first wrote this book, there are some basic principles that we know, but there wasn't really something that you could just hand to a person when stuff happens. And when I say stuff happens, death, right? That's a euphemism, right? When people
Correct.
die, to have something to give to them. So That is, I love the concept because this is an area, Alex, you shared with us that, when people came to your office, sometimes this was the last thing that they were thinking about, or it was hard to talk to them about. They're kind of all over the place, right? And so having something there. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit, or a lot, because that was back in 1993, and you are on the sixth edition of this book now. How has the financial advice for widows evolved from that first edition?
Well, some of it hasn't changed much. The big adage about don't make any irrevocable decisions, don't pay off the mortgage, don't buy life insurance and annuities, whatever. A lot of that has not changed. But what has changed is the grieving process, and of course the investment and tax situation. But Mary's part is really a part that, yeah, 'cause historically, and I'm going to ask Mary to talk about this theory. You're focused on the financial, but our whole underlying message is get your financial house in order. And then when you become a widow, or if you become a widow, you can deal with the grieving process. Mary, talk about what's changed in the grieving theory idea.
Well, for many, many years, we had really views about loss, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, with the phases of mourning. And then there was also the test of mourning. And that stayed pretty much the same throughout the years until recently, when a good bit more research has been done, particularly in Australia, that allowed people to recognize that all death is not equal. Um, Therefore, reactions are not all equal. So for someone that has lost a husband after a long illness, um, and prolonged agony on both sides versus sudden loss are two entirely different situations. And recovering is really not the same. Also, we have learned that recovery is not linear. You do not have to go from one phase to the next and get into the next phase and then graduate from that. That it takes each woman her own time and her own space to mourn in terms of what is going to work for her.
I love that. I love that. I remember I had a friend of mine pass when I was in my early 20s, and the Kubler-Ross book on death and dying, that was what was out.
Right.
And so I didn't know that had evolved really. And what you're talking about here, the idea of not all loss is equal, the idea that sudden loss is ways different, and that recovery is not linear. It's always going to be on a different timeline per person. That whole process of grieving, or grieving theory, has evolved and changed since the beginning of the book to now. And then, Alex, you started with just the on the financial side, just the idea of getting your house in order, but being in a spot where you can address this stuff again, death, right? Let me say it again. Let me get that word out. So addressing death as that it comes online. And as we have our loved ones and our family members pass, making sure that you get your financial house in order at the start there. Let me ask you about your personal experiences that influence these new updates and additions in this edition, especially considering Alex's recent experience of widowhood.
Well, as I said in the beginning of this book, I'd written 5 editions with Mary, advising people, and then I was, and of course that gave me a different perspective. And part of it was what Mary said. My husband had been ill for a while, so I had some getting used to the idea, and made me realize the difference. But it also made us, we knew before, but it's not that all widows are not the same. Obviously, somebody who is widowed in their 40s is going to react differently than somebody who reacts in their 70s or 80s, when one of you was probably going to die before the other, so that there's a difference in reaction, which is why one of the things that we did was different in this book, is we weave the stories of 4 widows at different stages in their lives, in different circumstances and different geographic locations. For instance, one is a first marriage for her, second marriage for him, dealing with the stepchildren and dealing with their mother in a retirement community. And which makes the point, you don't view widowhood in a vacuum, that you may be dealing with other senses of loss, so other issues that require your attention at the same time. And it's not, you can't just sit in a corner and grieve. You've got to go on with your life and other things. So that's one of the things, which is another thing that makes our book different. You're like reading a novel at the same time you're reading a how-to book. So your eyes don't glaze over. And we have been, not to be sexist, but women relate more to stories and understanding it better.
Well, but I want to add to what Alex just said by saying that we had these 4 hypothetical women in the first book, and we also carried them through all the others, including the 6th. What's different is the world has changed a great deal since we wrote the first book. And so, for example, back in the day, there was no such thing as the internet, computers, and other things that people take for granted and have to deal with today. So in the format of the book, as Alex suggested, we have 4 widows, one in her 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the storylines that we have attached to these women represent what a woman in that decade would be most likely to have to deal with when she became a widow. So we have been told by many, many people that it's a dry subject. The math is sorry, Alex, but the stories do help it come alive.
I love it. I think that is a very good way to approach this topic. In my own practice, I work with clients 55 and up. And so a lot of times when I'm working with them, they might have been divorced prior and blended families, and there may be some mistrust with finances if they got burned in their first marriage or something like that. So these real life stories and situations that you're providing by illustrating these with the 4 different ladies that have 4 different situations, and a lot of the topics kind of bubbling up through 40, 50, 60s, or 70, whatever that generational band is. I think that's a great way to come at that topic because everybody's situation is going to be unique and different. What are some of the most common financial mistakes that new widows make, and how can they avoid them?
Well, there's several, but as I said, making irrevocable decisions. I think that the problem again is psychological effect of your financial. Your husband died, and couldn't control that, so you want to prove that you're in control. So you prove it by, oh, I'm going to go take a trip, or I'm going to spend a lot of money. I wanted a new car. And you really can't do stuff like that until you look at your total situation. So the biggest mistake is rushing into irrevocable decisions. And, that old adage about don't do anything you can't change in the first year really is true. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice. I mean, if you have an expensive house and you can't afford it anymore. So I guess the best piece of advice, and I know you'll identify with this, is go seek some professional advice. Because that's the other thing. You've got well-meaning friends and family telling you, giving you advice, but they really don't know your particular circumstances. And what you need is somebody who has been there, done that with other people, and can give you some objective advice. Not your family's well-being. Sometimes you have adult children who say, "Oh, mom, I'll take over," and you say, "Oh, okay." Well, that's not the best advice in the world.
I love it. I love it. That is, I will definitely piggyback off of that and say, yes, I agree. The idea of not making those irrevocable decisions right away, a biggie, that making those large purchases, going out and getting a boat or an RV or taking this big trip, something that has a big price tag on it, putting some time between that, making a big decision like that, a lot of power in doing that for sure. And then the second thing that you talked about was seeking professional advice. Human beings have a hard time asking for help, right? But this is one of those times that nodding or hitting the shoulder of somebody, tapping an expert or a professional there really, really helps. And Mary, tell us a little bit about your profession as well, because that has shaped the way that you've come at this topic as well.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's I mean, my profession, I am a psychologist. And there are many, many aspects in psychology. But as far as the grief goes, we have learned a lot. And really, if you're dealing with somebody who is really experiencing loss and grief, we try to go with where they are and move forward. And one of the messages in our book is that by having the security of understanding where you are financially help the mourning process. It doesn't take it away, but it helps it because it enables you to have some sense of grounding of where am I? Where am I going? How am I going to survive? So while you're in all this emotional turmoil, if you get a better handle on where you are financially, then it allows you to move forward in a better way.
That makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things that attracted me to the book on your own, the idea that, it's coming at it from two different angles. So the finances are important, but the grieving process, when we talk about the grieving process, I think about, people having a support network. How important is the role of community and support networks in the financial and emotional recovery process for widows?
I think about that. Well, I'm sorry, Mary, this is sort of your
Go ahead.
department.
Go ahead.
Some
Yeah,
people
well, that's okay.
out there. Some people in their church groups, synagogue, groups of single older people. That some people find great comfort there. Other people will sort of want to do it on their own. But Mary, I should defer to you on this one. Go on.
Well, that's okay. We've done this a lot. Anyway, anyway, it's a huge variable because community is important, but it also depends on the individual. And as Alex started to say, people mourn in different ways. Some people seek a great deal of support and find it comforting, and others would rather read, philosophize, spend time alone. So it really depends on the individual. I would say the key thing there is if you have somebody that is stuck at a particular level, that would be of concern. And then one should seek the help that is out there because there are many therapists that really are working primarily in the grief area as well as groups. And you can find that online in today's world, which is very important. And I have a friend, for example, that I know has gotten a great deal. She's a psychologist, and she's gotten a great deal out of her widow support group.
I love it. I love it. So two different types of people there. One that the group aspect, Alexandra shared with us the idea of church groups or your synagogue or
Right.
even a group therapy or group support. But then there's people who would be more inclined to do something individual and just raising their hand and getting help through a therapist or somebody who's that's their profession. They're good at that, right? And that's exactly why you would
Right.
tap them and bring them in. Um, let's talk a little bit about the idea of as kind of worst case scenario, but if you have, both grieving and you have what we call financial recovery, right? Maybe you have a bad financial situation that bubbles up during this, kind of Murphy's Law, the worst possible time that it could. How do you deal, or what kind of advice do you have for widows who are dealing with both grief and financial recovery simultaneously?
Well, one, I want to say they need to know it's okay to seek help for whatever it is, and that they haven't done anything wrong if they ask for help. And we don't want them to do anything immediately. We want them to take the time to understand where they are in order to go forward. The other thing is hope. In this book, the way we have it written, we want them to understand they have the ability to understand where they are financially, whether or not they have done it in the past. The fact that you have never been involved with making the investments or even paying the bills doesn't preclude your ability to do so. And that with whatever support you need that can be provided, you are going to move forward over time. You can take your time getting there, but you will get there and control your own finances. Listen, not everyone has enough money, but knowing where you are is a super important first step.
Another topic, Chris, that we haven't talked about is the internet. I think sometimes, and again, this is where our book is. I think some people, we look up the medicine, what's wrong with us, everything on the internet. Well, as you and I both know, and Mary knows as well, your financial answers aren't always answered on the internet. Advice on the internet is not. And one of the topics that we do talk about, not in depth, but we talk about it is, as we all know, fraud. We worry about being taken advantage of. The widow is looking for help. She's looking for a surrogate husband. She's looking for, and she can be taken advantage of. And so there are so many warnings out there about it, but still I saw an episode on CBS, I think about a month ago. I don't know if you saw it, about the widow who was a hospital administrator, and she was conned for $1.5 million out of her savings. And she was too embarrassed to admit that she had done it, which of course is part of it. So that's one thing that we say, in fact, I have a good friend who found a good companion on the internet. But we interviewed her and we said, what do you need to do to make sure you find the right person, not the wrong person? And she helped us out, and we introduced that in one of the widow's vignettes. So, that's something to watch out for too. The internet can be your friend, but also your enemy.
Absolutely. We are bumping right here towards the end of the show. So, let's work backwards here. So we talked a little bit about financial fraud and the idea that widows are out there looking for help. But we know that a good bit of financial fraud focuses on elderly. Sometimes it's family members. And now they're getting very, very complex with AI and technology and all that. You also mentioned the idea that when this stuff happens to people, they're embarrassed, right? They're embarrassed to kind of admit that it happens. And so, that's part of the problem, is being able to be comfortable with telling people, like kind of raising your hand and fessing up that this has happened. But that all started with what you brought up, Alex, was the internet, right? So the idea of people looking to the internet for advice, financial advice, that, that there are other avenues, and you got to kind of take some of that with a grain of salt for sure. And then, Mary, you mentioned that it's okay to seek help, for people to know that there's hope there, and really understanding where you're at. I mean, I can't tell you how many stories I've had where people, couples, one person in the couple feels like they're the financial person, and then the person passes and they've left that person with no idea what's going on with the finances. And they didn't mean to do that. They were doing it out of the love of their heart. They thought they were saving that person time, but it really put them in a predicament. So I feel like we could keep going for forever here, but we're right here at the end of the show.
So anyway, I do think it's important, although this book is focused on widows, we really want to say it has a great deal for others, particularly younger. People that have read the book that have been widows have very frequently said to us, I'm giving this book to my daughter, to my son, to my sister, because the information is so valuable. And that is really a part of the message. Because if you do this stuff before, if you get into the act and learn more about where you are financially before you're widowed, you're in a much better place. So I wanted to tuck that in there.
The other thing, I don't want to leave it, is not only other people, but divorcees. Even though we didn't write it for divorcees, it definitely applies. And so we wrote it specifically for widows, but we've had several people and single women. I have a friend who's in the financial field. She said, I learned a lot from reading it. So it is a book for all women. We decided to focus it on widow, but I think any woman would benefit from it. In fact, I just got a letter from a woman thanking me for sending the book. She's a recent widow, and she said, "Thank you for writing a book for me." And I
love it.
Wonderful.
I love it. So they're giving it to a parent or a family member, and they thumb through it, and there's like, wait a second, this applies to me. So younger people, divorcees, single women, really a lot of information that can be helpful for many. So again, the book is On Your Own. We are on the 6th edition now. Alex and Mary, the last few minutes of the show, is there anything I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners today?
Well, this is not as universal, but when you said things to avoid, I thought of one other thing. Don't loan money. Don't loan money till you know your circumstances. Your family may come to you and say, oh, I need this, I need that. And you need to say, honey, I don't know my situation yet. Let's wait a while before we do it. So that's the other word of caution I have for a recent widow.
I just feel I would want every widow to come out of this reading knowing that there is hope for her in the future. And she needs to take her time, but she will get there.
I love it. What a great place to end the show today. Thank you both for being on the show. Have a good rest of the day there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.